to a fork in the road. There were no signs there to direct, so I didn't know which way to go. Then my mind went back to my childhood, to that little log church on the hill, to that night when my mother almost dropped me, when the power of the Lord, it came down. When the power of God came, when the power of God came down, that night my mother almost dropped me, when the power of the Lord, it came down.
The fire of the Lord came down, and the sound of Presbycast came from thine speakers. It's another episode of Presbycast. Presby and Chortles here as usual. Listeners and heck, at this point, viewers won't be able to tell, but I've actually moved studios from the home office to the kitchen so that Mrs. Resby could sleep tonight. Believe it or not, she does not like hearing 25% of any episode. She much prefers less than 1% of all of them. So with that, I decided to, be the considerate husband and allow her a little bit more time. So good job, me, is ultimately what I'm saying. I will accept hearty applause and congratulations, however you see fit. But we've got two great guests tonight. One who's on far too much. The other, Aaron, not on nearly enough. And so it's time that we make way for these folks. But if you are watching, you can place your wager as to whether or not you think Dr. Sean Morris is sitting in front of a digital background, or does he actually live in the chalet of Tennessee that he calls his home?
He's coming to us live from the 1970s.
Yes.
Pretty much. And by the way,
there are many who say we've been doing that for quite some time.
Yeah. Well, since you're in the kitchen, remember that in a Presbycast live show of old, the call-in show, not only did we have some marital discord between some callers, but we had the use of the ice maker in close proximity to someone's microphone. So, if you need ice, feel free. It's been done before.
It gives me, while a great personal sacrifice, it does give me great joy to say that my ice maker in my fridge is about 50-50 as to whether or not it's going to work. Some people say we used to make stuff in this country, and one of those things was ice makers that lasted 20 years. Because now, about every, 2-3 weeks or so, mine completely freezes up. I've got to turn it off for like 4 days. And then when I turn it on, I seem to get a fraction of the ice that I used to. So probably very few worries of that happening. But we can do an ice maker episode if we need to. We have the technology.
Yeah, well, we know that, and we'll keep that in our back podcasting pockets.
That was a fun callback to like 2016, 2017, though.
Yeah, probably one or the other. Almost 10 years ago, and that makes no sense at all.
Think of all the listeners could have accomplished, but instead they listened to us.
Yeah. Yep. There are a few people that have listened to most of our shows, and that's their problem, I guess. Well, our last show was on worship. It was more specifically on the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. But sometimes we're reactionaries, and we're reacting to things that we see and hear online and in the real world. And something occurred that made us think about, how to promote reverence in worship. There are like 4 really important words in the New Testament about worship: spirit and truth, reverence and awe. And those things are not as easy to define as you might think. But like a certain Supreme Court justice said he couldn't define pornography, but he knew it when he saw it. So maybe that's what we're going to have to rely on with reverence and awe and worship in spirit. We may be able to figure out the truth, but that whole spirit thing is a little tougher. But we are going to talk about worship 2 shows in a row. That's no surprise. But we're probably doing a show on a topic that no one's ever exactly done before, and we've done a lot of those. Maybe there's a reason no one had done them before or since, but here we are. So we do have with us my senior pastor of my church, Sean Morris, Dr. Sean Morris. He doesn't require anyone except his wife to call him doctor, so he's humble in that way. And he's a PCA pastor, of course. And then our buddy Aaron DeBoer, who has been on before. He's in the upper left-hand corner of the continental U.S. And Aaron, remind everybody about what you do up there and where, and your sort of unique situation.
Yeah, we're calling in from the Mount Baker Highway, which is a unique strip of asphalt that runs from Pacific saltwater to Alpine Glacier in 56 miles in the northwestmost corner of the lower 48. I'm about 5 miles from the Canadian border.
So if we decided to invade, you could be the tip of the spear.
Yeah, that's right. I've often said that we could take British Columbia with the young men in our church and their BB guns. Yeah.
Well, you may be called upon, so just stand by. There could be a Christian prince on the other end of the line one day, and you may have your marching orders. That'd
be good. I'm ready. Alberta is way ahead of the curve. You know, I don't know if you've seen this. This is marvelous. Their independence movement that's ongoing.
Oh yeah. Yep, I've heard about that. So maybe they won't regret that at any point. So, and you're an ARP pastor. You know, are you still in plant status up there?
No, we've been particularized for about 3 years.
Okay.
And yeah, wonderful little church that we started as a rural Reformed Bible study during the recent unpleasantness known as the Rona, and we found a home in the ARP through just a number of providences. One of them, a former Oak Ridge minister in Duncan Rankin, who was helping me into the THM program at Erskine, and that sort of greased the skids, and it's just been a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I think you when you visited my house, you were on your way to kind of be accepted, right? I mean, that's
when I was just sniffing around. Yeah, the presbytery there a little bit and investigating. And so about 6 months after that, I came into the ARP in 2022. Yeah.
Well, very good. And you're in an interesting part of the country for things Reformed. A lot of diversity up there in the upper northwest.
Yeah, we're in an interesting context in that it is, very much left coast, post-Christian, and then rural, and then also adjacent to a historic Dutch covenantal community in Lyndon, Washington, where there's a number of URC churches and CRC churches and even Canadian and American Reformed churches and so forth. So we minister to, let's just say, the more odd ducks of the foothills, and just a wonderful congregation. So if they're odd ducks, I guess I'm the Drake of that little flock.
Well, just stick your head under the water if things get too rough.
Right off my back.
Now, are you somewhat bivocational? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I have a unique call. I was a ski bum entrepreneur for most of my adulthood until the Lord grabbed a hold of me. I was even a libertine for quite a time and outside the visible church. But yes, our congregation is quite small. And so the investments that I was building to have a seasonal ski bum lifestyle now do quite well of supporting bivocational ministry in the mountains.
Well, that's good. I think, if the culture continues to go the way some of us think it might, we've posited that bivocational ministry is going to become more common, not less common. And probably something to be thinking about from time to time. And you're a good role model for us in that respect.
Well, thank you. It's great to be able to devote myself full time to the congregation, and we've got a rich week by week in the Word, and yet the Lord is providing all our needs. It's just been wonderful.
All right. Well, we're not going to show the video, and I don't even remember where the church is or which one it was, but someone posted a video, and then one of the big accounts posted it. I think I received it privately before it ever went viral. But there was a church, and it was a Reformed church, and they, I would say unwisely, had announcements in the middle of the service. And we'll talk about some of the probably unhelpful service orders that don't help us with reverence. But they had mid-service announcements, and one of the announcements was given by a woman dressed like a chicken, which was a little jarring, a little unusual. And I think in response to that, privately, you posted a section from the 1647 Directory for Public Worship that was part of the Westminster Confession documents, and I guess that directory was only ever used by the Church of Scotland for a time. And actually, I was, as I was searching today, there are some nearly direct quotes from that 1647 document in our directory in the PCA. There's a couple of sentences that if you Google the text, it's going to find the PCA directory. So it has had legs and it has had influence, but you were prompted to refer people to that. So just tell us about a little bit about the directory, and especially that part on assembling. I'll put it on the screen. Assembling the saints for worship, and I've heard my own ministers talk about things like this, but I think for a lot of people, it's just something that's not even on the radar. Let's just get to church however we can and just do something. But going this deep is not where most people are going to be.
Right. Some of the American directories still mirror it a little bit, like you say, with the PCA, the OPC, the ARP. You can see the bones of the document, and it's part of the standards that were adopted by the Assembly, and it assumes a lot of the other things within the Confession and the Catechism. You're aware then. You're as a minister, you're aware of what your responsibilities are in teaching your congregation the fourth commandment duties and so forth. And so when I was teaching through this, I actually started with the call to worship and really the theology of that, of coming to Mount Zion when Christ from his throne calls. And then once you understand what a call to worship is, then it opens up your mind and your thoughts to all of these other responsibilities and preparations and so forth, that like we find in the larger catechism around the fourth commandment. So for our congregation, it's just helpful to meditate on these things. And I think how I responded to some of that information that we were seeing a week and a half ago was that our congregation thrilled in being discipled in the solemn nature, the august, reverend nature of worship. Again, already considering what it is to come to the Lord's footstool, or his garden, mountain, temple, as we like to say. So what it does is very pastoral. Some of these things step on our modern toes a little bit, but if we think about the Assembly being ministers who were acquainted with their congregations and the unique difficulties around the Lord's Day, they had to get a cow milked and a half dozen kids, somewhat presentable, to go up to the house of the Lord. And so these are directions on how to cultivate that sort of preparation. And maybe we should say as well that the history of the directory was a response to liturgy and forms in the Church of England. So the directory is just that. It's a reference to cultivate the heart issues that are described in the various other doctrines and duties in other parts of the standards. And so when the congregation is to meet, parenthetically, already having prepared their hearts, this is a well-taught congregation that knows what they've come to do. And then it goes on to just work through these various things. And so we can do that line by line if we like, but it really is this notion of adoration and duty that should be built into the fabric of a congregation.
Yeah, well, it sort of predicts what we would see in the 20th and 21st century, that you shouldn't absent yourself, and you should show up, is what that means. And we know that in a lot of congregations, there's a small percentage of members there at any given time. But also, you shouldn't neglect public worship upon, quote, the pretense of private meetings. So the evangelical tendency for, a private spirituality, or small groups that replace public worship, or worshiping on the golf course. Had they invented golf by 1547? Sean, you would probably know that. Was golf a thing by then?
I don't know that it was a thing by 1547 or even 1647, but it was at least popular enough in the 20th century such that Winston Churchill famously quipped that golf is a good walk spoiled. Right.
But, it was born in Scotland, and this is largely a Scottish
That's right.
Document. So I wondered, so they even predicted worship on the golf course, which is not, in fact, that. So, yeah, Darren, I don't think we have to go through all of it line by line, but what are some parts that, some people have never heard these. We hear prepare your hearts for worship, but some people have never heard. That's one of the reason we've posted a lot of sermons over the years about worship and sacraments, because most people are not taught on it at all, even in some good churches. So this would be foreign, unfamiliar content to a lot of even Reformed church members. Some of it grates on our it grates on our modern sensibilities. We'll talk about that too. So we have to be reasonable, but we can do better. I think that's the point.
Yeah, and that next line, what stands out is they're often mindful of people who are still thinking in terms of statuary and so forth in the Romanist church, so that you're not, you're not going to go genuflect. But the line there about taking their seats without adoration, it strikes me as the attention getting that some may be prone to in called worship.
Like going down to the front and crossing yourself, or bowing to the statue that you helped purchase, or something like that.
And I wonder if we couldn't draw that to some of the spectacles that then appear. I don't know about the chicken suit, but I think even far more common would be the praise team. And these have come to be the elites of worship in our culture at times. And they just necessarily may receive a certain amount of adoration or have their ego a little bit cultivated because of that prestige and that position. And so that strikes me as insightful as well. Whether it, in the 17th century, obviously you had the aristocratic families who could afford to dress well, and then you had the paupers who, were smudged. And so we recognize that there's all that going on. It was 400 years ago, and it still does. The attention seeking and so forth that our fallen hearts are prone to. So these things are just very insightful and pastoral with regard to some of the, uglier things that might intrude.
Yeah, so I don't think Sean, I've heard Nick, our associate pastor. He was a senior pastor for more than 16 years or something like that.
Yeah, 17, 18 years, yeah.
And he recommended a book called How to Walk into Church. Mm-hmm. And it was about preparation, and I think it touched on a lot of these issues. I never came across that book. But this touches on, Aaron, how to walk into church. Physically, spiritually, mentally, where your mind is. Now, this is all easier said than done. If we want our kids to worship with us, and we even, might even encourage people to have as many kids as they'd like to, there are going to be difficulties that attend that. If we live in a culture where disabled people, elderly people who wouldn't have been able to travel in the 16th century, quite frankly, it's much easier for people to come to church now. But we've got all this diversity of types of people, ages, physical abilities, familiarity with Christianity and with reverent worship. So it's not going to be perfect. Okay, so we're not talking about a museum piece, a piety perfectionism. That's not what we're talking about. This is aspirational, and this is how it ought to be, and what we ought to be trying to do. But we shouldn't be too terribly disappointed when we don't meet the standard in every respect. So reverently entering, that's something, we can talk about that in our own church, being larger than yours. When I do the announcements, we rotate the call to worship among the ruling elders, and they end up doing the announcements. I'll stand up to the microphone and I'll say, because, probably a quarter of the congregation is out in the narthex, I'll say, if the psalmist were here, he might have said, I was glad when they said unto me, let us move from the narthex into the worship hall. So the pre-service announcements actually give us a chance to get people in, get the boisterousness toned down, because obviously no one listens to the announcements, which every minister knows.
I have an announcement. In what may be only the divine sense of humor, my ice maker just kicked on and dumped a fresh load into the tray. So we're back, baby. We're back.
All right. It's ruining our decorum, but we'll take it.
Having lost our train of thought there, although
right.
I hope we captured the sound so that maybe it can be used as something like the Machen horn in the future.
It sounds like rocks being thrown at the side of your home.
Very much in keeping with the Resby brand. That's good.
Brad, you talk about, and I was pleased to worship in your church some years ago and see that decorum and so forth, and that does show wisdom, because we would say the announcement period is before the call to worship, and it is bridging that entry to the footstool. But it too, requires some wisdom. Again, these are directions. This is wise counsel. What sort of things are we going to bring up? My mind even went to, and this may strike as very odd because we're so used to it, the things that have come into worship, particularly in the last century. What is the content even of the bulletin that is before someone? When you're a kid, tic-tac-toe is going to be ubiquitous. But if you're thinking about going to Martha's bridal shower on Friday night, or these sorts of things, those are the very different distractions than the sense of awe. And look how the divines write it. They want us, again, counterintuitive, to enter into the humiliation of worship, that we immediately, as creatures, acknowledge the incomprehensible greatness and majesty of the Creator. And so we're so used to the distractions and so forth. I think there's probably a lot of categories of things that go on the Lord's Day that we could look at through this lens. And again, it would be strange because we're just so used to the way we do it.
One of the things that gets me about an announcement sometimes, someone will say, well, there are a lot of things that are going to happen this week, but don't think about that, which just makes you think about it. So I don't ever put it that way. But you're talking about the content of announcements even, or the bulletin could be distracting. Well, I was very distracting once. I announced I referred to an upcoming wedding as a funeral. That's right. So yeah, that happened. But I was trying to bring everybody down, the humiliation, Aaron. What you said.
Yeah.
That's what I was working on.
Humor,
so
humiliation. Yeah, I see the
without
cognitive.
FUN.
So you referred to a line from the directory here. In all reverence and humility, acknowledging the incomprehensible greatness and majesty of the Lord. So this is more generally about worship, but I don't want to forget to bring it up. I think we believe that the doctrine of God, who God is, his attributes, ought to certainly inform the way we worship and how we enter into worship. But I think we should acknowledge that if we aren't reverent and if we aren't orderly, I don't know that people can believe that God is worthy. Theology and worship are mutually reinforcing or mutually undermining, I think. We don't want to create cognitive dissonance. We want it to be, while we are still human and have grace for human frailties, if we don't worship reverently, I think it undermines what we preach and teach about God. Sean?
Yeah, I think this is something we're going to come back to over and over again throughout the conversation, which is good, but it's just this idea that our theology is never held in abstraction. It is embodied practice. And so while we can debate the various particularities about one church's custom versus another church's custom, and that's fine, the overarching principle stands that the manner in which we approach an event or the manner in which we approach a time communicates something about how we regard that time. And so it's fair to say, maybe it's painfully obvious to our listeners, but I hope not, but it's the manner in which we approach a worship service on the Lord's Day, the manner in which we go into the room, the manner in which we settle ourselves in and get ready for it, it's going to look and feel differently than how we might wander into the movie theater, how we might wander into a family gathering. I mean, to give something of a parallel example, generally speaking, there's a certain decorum in which the public, even in our highly secularized age, there's a decorum in which people approach a funeral. There's a manner in which they present themselves, they conduct themselves with a particular outward appearance, with a particular social mannerisms. I'm not saying that worship necessarily has to be funereal, but the manner in which you approach the worship service communicates something about the seriousness with which you take it. So it is with a funeral, so it is with a wedding, so it is with a worship service. You don't enter into the worship hall or approach the worship service with the same sort of casual or cavalier or relaxed manner that you might go to the local movie theater. Again, we can talk about the different particularities. I suspect we will, but I think that that's going to be a principle that we get back to over and over and over again in tonight's conversation, is that we are embodied people. We are embodied creatures, and our theology is going to take expression. Our convictions are going to take expression. We don't just hold these principles in the abstract. The posture of our heart, the convictions of our soul are going to have a realized expression. This is almost media ecological in the nature of the conversation, and I think that's fine. I think there's lots of ways where these two things do run in parallel, and so if we bring in some media ecology principles to this topic tonight, then that's great. But the point being that we have both form and content, and that content is going to be expressed in a certain form. So our reverence, our regard for the Lord whom we love, and our regard for his worship which we love, our approach to it is going to take on a certain form, and that's okay. That's a good thing, and we ought to recognize that.
Yeah, Terry Johnson said somewhere, and I can't find it, but that you've got to have a reformed bucket to carry reformed water, and that's liturgical. But it's not just a schedule. I mean, liturgy is not just the order in which you do things; it's how you do them too, and that's the reverence and awe side of it. That doesn't mean nobody smiles. It doesn't mean nobody laughs. But we're not, it's not we don't engineer those things. They happen hopefully naturally and organically, to use a word that is pretty worthless.
I think in some 20th century worship that this the engineering, maybe in our circles, looked like a dirgy prelude. So it was attempting to communicate something solemn, but it had people run the other way. The reaction of modern worship, it very much in many ways is an overreaction to the engineered solemnity. This has to be taught joyfully. We have to remind people that, you look at this altar, and so we're coming into his courts with joy. We're coming into his courts singing with a shout, these sorts of things. So they're held in tension. There's a reverence for the king, and there's also a joy that he's beckoning us with his scepter. And so you have to teach that, because if we're teaching chicken suits or we're teaching dirges, we're not teaching. So the elders have a responsibility there to describe what worship in Zion is, and that it has both of these things, an incredible reverence and an incredible privilege. And we are not worthy, but yet we are. It says, come, over and over. The call goes out, come.
So, when I think about decorum, I even think about the way people dress, the way ministers dress. It's not to say that the Genevan gown is required or the best thing in the 21st century. But I'd like to ask both of you: is your standard at least to be neat and tidy and not terribly distracting or flashy? Sometimes I want to go up to these guys that are, Sean's friends and pull the pocket square out of their pocket. But I'll leave that jihad to another day. But what about decorum, including dress?
Yeah, Brad has a peculiar fixation and hostility towards the pocket square attracted, but that's okay. That's a topic for another day. No, I think, excuse me, on the tail end of a cold here, I apologize. I do think that we cannot be relativists, but we can also be realists. And what I mean by that is that reverence through dress and some of these outward expressions, they are culturally conditioned to some extent, but not entirely. And here's what I mean by that. In several of the Free Church of Scotland worship services in which I visited when I've been over to Scotland a couple of times, it's interesting. Generally, in the Reformed churches here in America, we will ordinarily remain seated to pray. But in those Free Church of Scotland congregations, if you wanted to get the whole congregation to stand up right away, you just had to say 3 words: "Let us pray," and the whole congregation would stand up. That's just what they did.
Sean, I figured out from watching a psalm singing video from the Isle of Lewis why they sit to sing and stand to pray.
Okay.
Because they've got the little desks on the back of the pew in front of them for the split-leaf psalter.
Yep.
And there's no heat in those churches, so it's about 40 degrees.
Yep.
So they put their hands in their pockets while they're singing. They don't hold the hymn book. The hymn book is on a little shelf in front of them.
All right, yep.
And they can put their hands in their pockets and stay warm. And then when they stand up to pray, they can also keep their hands in their pockets. So it's all about not freezing to death.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my
there
theory.
you go. That'll work. That's a workable theory. So all of that to say is that, in that culture, standing to pray and being seated to sing is evocative of reverence for them. It communicates seriousness to the occasion. It communicates a reverence to the occasion, and that's a good thing. Now, maybe that particular custom may not translate to every nation and every culture. That's fine, but there are going to be little customs like that in any given culture where doing this thing communicates seriousness. Doing this thing communicates a high regard for the occasion. So, is it business suits in many cultures in the West? Sure, absolutely. Men, even in our highly irreverent, overly casual age, ordinarily, at least in the American South, men will wear a suit to a funeral. That's how you communicate respect to the deceased. It's how you communicate respect to the family, communicate respect to the occasion by how you dress. And that's, again, we're going to come back to this. Outward form is going to help you communicate the posture or the disposition of your heart and mind and attitude, and in the case of worship, your soul. It expresses something of your inner demeanor or conviction. So that a funeral is an easy example. So likewise, how a man, how a woman, how a child dresses as they come to worship is going to communicate. It's going to give an indication of the regard they have for that occasion. Now, how we dress...
But it's a reminder to us, too. We tend to act differently in different types of clothing. So it's not just outward, it's inward as well.
Yeah.
You know, if you're wearing a suit and tie and you're not accustomed to it, I guess it could be distracting to you, but it's a reminder at least. You know, you don't want the button, the top button, if it's 3 inches too small, because you'll choke and you'll be suffering the whole time. You have to make some. You got to make some allowances, but it's a reminder to us too.
Yeah, it is. That's right. How we dress, it will inevitably shape our own behavior and approach to the occasion. I mean, again, this is not worship specific, but there are studies. There's quantifiable data that they've done where they have students take something like, I forget the exact exam, but something like the SAT, something like the ACT, and they have one test group of students wear casual clothes, another test group of students wear formal business clothes like a suit, and inevitably the sample set of the young men wearing suits scored higher on the exam than they did their more casually dressed peers. So how you dress, just to give one easy example, will inevitably affect your demeanor and approach to the occasion. So, you know, I live in East Tennessee. I'm in the American South. I'm in the West. Business suits, that's an easy example of how one might dress to approach the occasion. When I worshiped with the brethren in the Presbyterian Church in the Gambia, in West Africa, they didn't wear suits, but there was this beautiful sort of traditional, almost suit-like garb that the minister would wear, the Gambian brother. Some of them were blue, some were scarlet red, some were white, but it was this sort of embroidered tunic. I don't know how best to describe it, with trousers.
Kind of like a smock.
Yeah, kind of like a smock. So they had trousers and sandals and a smock, and it was clearly a very formal thing that he would wear, not during Monday to Friday sort of everyday business, but he would wear it, and it communicated seriousness and reverence for the occasion. It wasn't a Western-style business suit, but it was appropriate to their culture. It communicated seriousness to the occasion. It communicated what was intended to be broadcast.
Aaron, your thoughts on this? You're in a different. You're decidedly not in the American South. You're in. There's a weird kind of right-wing hippie up where you live, isn't there?
That's
the
a
crunchy
good label
type.
in some quarters. Yeah, it would be very casual. It would be very, not quite the pajama craze, like the kids taking the standardized test and doing poorly, but almost in some places of worship. And so there's definitely room for that. And then, I've also, growing up in the Dutch churches, I've seen the oversteer in the other direction where, the ladies' hats become over the top. And so it's so interesting to see how immodest we are in so many different ways. And again, so I think this is taught. I think there's a piece here too with regard to the officers. They're called to be august. They're called to have their homes in order and so forth. So that, why? Because what we're undertaking is serious. And so the people we're looking to for teaching and for leadership are exemplifying that in a way. So I think there's a call there for the officers to exemplify a humble but appropriate approach, even in how we dress. I used the illustration in teaching this when I was younger, and I was standing before a judge for a pretty significant traffic infraction. The guy in front of me, fortunately, had, and this is in the early 2000s, the guy in front of me's got his baggy, saggy jeans, his hat on sideways, and the judge dressed him down for that and threw the book at him for his charge. And then I walked up just simply in a pair of khakis and an Oxford shirt, and he thanked me for dressing appropriately for the occasion, and he gave me a very light treatment for my ticket. And so I think there's something there too, where we know a level of appropriateness, but we're so individualistic and comfortable and casual. So it's a hard issue. It's got to be taught. It's got to be modeled, and you also got to safeguard the other side of the road where that ditch of formalism or fashion take hold.
Yeah, we had an old Dutch elder at our church. Sean never knew him. He was I think he has died since you moved here, but he's moved away. Yeah. He had to go live with his children, and I think he told me that in his day, and then I looked this up and kind of confirmed it up in Michigan, and he didn't know which Dutch Reformed church he grew up in, because there were several, and they all had about 5 letters, and they changed all the time. But he said that the minister would wear a coat with tails, that was long in the back, and the members of the consistory, which we would call elders, there was a door next to the pulpit, and they would come through the door and open it, hold it open for the minister, and he would walk out in front of them. And supposedly this was to remind him that they were watching him. It was a sign of respect, but it was also a warning sign to him. And but people thought their minister needed to dress in a way. They didn't wear a robe, but they wore, what we would call a really old-fashioned, hyper-formal kind of garment up into the, early, mid-20th century. So the
Domini coat.
Domini, yeah. That's right.
And you'll see that our brothers in the Canadian Reformed, I've preached in a couple of their churches, and there's a very deliberate signaling of the authority of the word. The chair of the consistory will give the right hand of fellowship to the minister before he ascends to the pulpit, and then when he comes down, if the elders are in agreement of how the word has been handled, then they will signal that to the congregation again with that right hand. So there are still some remnants of some of those symbols that were showing the importance, but also the oversight.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And also, I think it was Daryl Hart shared an article he found several years ago. It was some guy that had grown up Dutch Reformed in Michigan, and he wrote an article about what Sundays were like. And he was in one of those areas where they had 3 services. They had a morning, an afternoon, and an evening. So, lest we complain about our single hour and a half service that some people have, they were doing 3 in Michigan among the Dutch not so long ago. But I don't think that was ever really widespread. But yeah. All right, so we've covered decorum issues. Again, there's a challenge when you bring the kids and you encourage all the kids to be in the church. But I'll just say what I say to people in our church. I don't hear your kids carrying on and crying and all that. It bothers you much more than it bothers anyone else. So bring the kids to worship. It'll pay dividends through the rest of their life in most cases. But we can't demand some sort of pristine, perfect environment. There's balance here, and there's things that that work against each other, but we just have to deal with that.
I think kids are an interesting barometer because 1, 2, 3, even 4, they're acting out. They're just being kids, and then there comes a moment of apprehension for them where they realize nobody else is doing that. Mm-hmm. Mom and dad are serious. The minister is serious. The elders are serious. The people in the pew in front of us are serious. And so it's interesting that in that very infantile way, it can be caught. Solemnity can be caught by a child after time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's kind of the beauty of being in a church with, families, or especially if, the kids are in church with or friends with, older or, teenagers growing into adulthood, people they look up to. You inevitably, kind of watch those as someone impressionistic, and it's one of those moments where even as parents, you sort of rely on the other, trustworthy adults and families in the room to provide almost like a nonverbal instruction.
It takes a village to raise a
regard.
child. It takes a village, Resby. Don't you remember that?
Wise man once say.
Or women. So,
Well, and likewise, as we've seen, and I don't want us to I don't think the directory takes the posture of ragging on less pure churches, and I don't want us to do that terribly much here tonight. But, and maybe it's Resby who I first heard this from, that the 20th century generation invented youth group. It didn't work for covenantal succession. And then they doubled down and made the whole church youth group. And so this notion that kids grew up in expressions of Christianity that were not serious, and then they didn't take it seriously. So again, there's a balance to be struck there. But that is catechetical in terms of the approach to God, because the order of worship is simply a model of what of all our Christian life is going to look like. How are we going to approach God? Do we have ears to hear his voice? How are we going to approach him? What's the first thing we're going to do? We're either going to break out in praise or fall on our face in confession. And so we have to teach these serious things, because it's a mirror of what our walk with before the face, where the blessedness is for our whole life.
And I think, and I don't want to go too far off a tangent, but even on the everything is youth group point, which, wow, a lot of old references on the show tonight. But I think that's where it compounds in like good interest, in this sense of like when you have a pastor or you have elders who also approach worship seriously, and they approach their pastoral and elder duties seriously, that in a good church, chances are the pastor's been to your home or had conversations with your kids as well. So it's not like, I made a little bit of noise, but like it's inconsequential. Like when they know that their pastor knows them, all of a sudden, it's a healthy form of, discipline and restraint that goes into that. I've grown up with many friends and attended some at varying points that were, larger youth groupy evangelical churches, and a large number of those friends, while they're still great friends, are not in church anymore, whether that was from high school or university days. So it's there's something very important that happens with reverence and awe and decorum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and along those lines of thought, I don't have hard data to back this up. So if you'll permit me some anecdote and some sanctified conjecture, I'm sitting here thinking of the children of Israel gathered in assembly, or I'm sitting here thinking of the early synagogues or the early New Testament churches, and I'm having a hard time imagining a gathered assembly without wiggling children and squawking babies and those things that are natural and earthy and ordinary in the course of human life. Or
you left out people falling out of windows and getting killed temporarily.
That's right. Eutychus falling out of windows because Paul droned on too long. That's right. I mean,
that's why you put trampolines at the bottom and just bounce them right back in.
That's right. See, everything is youth group might save a life one of these days. So let's not write it off entirely. No.
Okay, so now we are going down the tangent of youth group, but I'm sure I've shared this one, but one of my favorite Simpsons episodes is where the church in Springfield hires somebody who's very like jazzy and exuberant and youthful, and everything goes off the rails, and there's some sort of chaos that ensues, and eventually Reverend Lovejoy gets back up and just starts droning, like just a monotone hum. Mm-hmm. And at some point, Homer stands up in the church and says, "Boring preaching has saved us all," when the conflict is resolved. And I think that was the last great Simpsons joke I watched live on television.
Man, there you go. But
Israel was a church underage, and so they come out of Egypt, and literally they were, on the former point, we and our little ones was the call from Moses. They go out, they don't know how to worship. They had not had the patriarchs. They'd been, so they needed to be instructed. They had the solemn assembly at at Horeb, and we know what happened while Moses was away conversing with Jesus. They broke out into
megachurch
play.
broke out. A
They
megachurch
broke out
broke
into
out.
play, and Sean knows what that word means in Hebrew. And these are the sorts of things. And then they were stubborn, and there was the sons of the high priest with playing with strange fire, and there were all these things that had to be taught, and it took a while until we arrive at a church under Joshua, which was serious. And so this is a process to bring a church to age.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm thinking too of even just the early, New Testament church gatherings, and you think of the letter to the Hebrews, which was likely one long sermon that would have been read in the hearing of the assembly. And I'm just, again, sanctified imagination. I'm imagining elderly and parents and young children and wiggling babies and squawking kids and all of those things which are earthy and ordinary and part of the life of the congregation, because they are to be expected, because they're humans and it's natural, and it doesn't necessarily detract from the reverence because it's just part of the ordinary course of human events and humans gathering. And where I was going with that in terms of just pure, hopefully, sanctified conjecture is that I wonder, and I don't know, but I'm just curious based on my own. Let me give an anecdote. Where I'm going with this is, I wonder if during the course of the 20th century we developed this overly sanitized, polished expectation for how worship should seem, and I'm talking even in older traditional style churches.
It's probably Victorian. It's probably a Victorian thing.
Yeah, before we even get into the more evangelical contemporary style things. So my boyhood church, growing up as a teenager, the pastor before my pastor, I'll make up a name, we'll call him Dr. Jones. I was told that back in the day, so this was a large church, very wealthy church. It was the downtown to-do church in the prominent leading city of the county, right? So he would bring in the babies to baptize them, after they were newly born, and then immediately whisk them right back out of the sanctuary, because we didn't want squawking babies disturbing the polished, sanitized, neat and tidy vibe or ethos of the worship service. Well, when my pastor took over, Dr. Long, after that pastor retired, that was one of the first things that he addressed with the session. He goes, absolutely not. The children will remain in the worship service, obviously with their parents' level of comfort and discretion, and of course, but there's no expectation that there's going to be no babies in the worship hall, that there's going to be no children in the worship hall. They absolutely belong here. We're not going to do any of this, baptize the kiddo and then whisk him away right away because lest he make noise. No, none of this nonsense. And so I just, that was a 20th century phenomenon that my pastor was relaying to me. And again, and you're saying, Brad, maybe in the 19th century, I think there's something to that of, over time, churches in the West got this overly sanitized expectation of a neat and tidy, dare I say, performance-oriented expectation of the worship service. And, squawking babies and wiggly children disturb that nice, tidy experience. And so we don't want to have that. So we got to do something to address that. And I just don't think the New Testament has that expectation at all. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think the children of Israel would have had that nice sanitized version. I don't think ordinary, healthy Reformed churches in our day have that nice sanitized version. It can be orderly, it can be reverent, it can have decorum, but it's not going to be this, worship experience in a vacuum, completely denuded of any sort of, down-to-earth, real-life factors.
Yes, we want no denuding at all. We're going to skip that. So let's talk about, you think, well, this should be obvious. This is common sense. But I think we all realize we live in an age where there's not much of that. Let's talk, and I am going to pick on some, I'm not going to name any, but there are things that churches do in their liturgy and when they have announcements and when they have fellowship time in the middle of the service. It's almost like it's calculated to be counter to decorum or reverence. I was at a PCA church once, and it was a great service. A deacon and I were on the way to a funeral. Sean, it was actually Duncan Rankin's and Aaron Duncan Rankin's father's funeral. And we stopped on the way there. We found a church to stop at, and because it was like early afternoon funeral. So we didn't skip worship. We went to worship, and it was a good service. It was a good sermon. But in the middle of the service, they pulled out a wireless mic, and their announcements were done by passing the mic around the congregation.
Oh, no.
People could say about anything they wanted to say, about whatever they wanted to say. It was like the Donahue Show for people who are old enough to remember such a thing. It
Presby
was
Access Television.
Oh man, it was just stunning. I'll never forget it. I don't think that's the way to go. But we also have this curious. So it's the tension. I think this is kind of the main last thing I want to cover. The tension between reverence and order and fellowship. So as I've thought about this, fellowship should be around the worship service. And of course, when we're having the Lord's Supper, that's a type of special kind of fellowship. But the fellowship, the socializing, should surround the worship service, but not invade it and not come into the middle of it. And we have churches today that they actually call it halftime. After the singing part and the liturgical part, sometimes before the sermon, maybe after the sermon, and before the Lord's Supper, or during the Lord's Supper, when it's kind of a free-form thing, they call it halftime. People hang out, they go to the bathroom, they get a donut, they refill their coffee, and it's chaotic. I've seen these things, and it's just, I think they mean well. I think, the relationalism is what I call it, but I think relationalism and fellowship, which is a peculiarly Christian word. We also make it a verb. Let's fellowship now.
Yeah.
It may come sort of from the Anglican passing the peace. A lot of Baptist churches did things like that in the middle of the service. Everyone shake hands or whatever, or you say something to your neighbor. But that's just I can't see why you would do it. If people really love each other in a church, they get there early, they stay late. Sean can vouch for this at our church. But the time for hanging out and socializing, and it says this in this document we have on screen, that there shouldn't be indecent behavior during the service. There shouldn't be private whisperings, conferences, or salutations. So that was all anticipated. It's like we're planning to fail on this, with the intent of promoting fellowship. So let's talk about that.
I think, you want to promote the positive, and a congregation that is, together more than that one episode on Sunday morning is going to be helpful. That they're immersed in the Word on the Lord's Day, both assemblies and perhaps some adult ed or Sunday school before or after a midweek opportunity. That Christian has a different kind of fellowship. It's just starkly different because they're there for the Word. They're there to sing psalms of praise and to have these things, to have their hearts, broken by the law and then just totally healed by the gospel. They're doing that together. Luther had famously his table talk that, the fellowship was, they even had a stein of beer, but it was requisite that they continued to dialogue about the things they were learning and being taught. And I don't think you can just make that happen. It has to be a congregation immersed in the Word. And if this is a one-time event and, mom's been home alone all week and so forth, of course, it's going to be a great appetite to catch up with friends and so forth. But if the word of the culture of the congregation is the Word, the warmth of that fellowship and the intimacy of what we're experiencing together in our own, even to go to the language of the director, we're all being humiliated before the Lord and lifted up. And we wouldn't have anything in common otherwise, but for that. that sort of culture only comes from Christ in and on the word affecting the people. And so I think it is incumbent on the leadership again to make the culture of the church word centric throughout the week, with multiple opportunities and fellowship meals and all these things connected to the means of grace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that some churches today, I mean, it's not uncommon, even in the PCA, for churches that have the Lord's Supper every week but only have one service. They put so much weight on that one climactic event that it becomes overlong, or it tempts you to cut some corners, and it's actually and you're asking a lot of people for this long service, and it's got to be right. Everything's got to be perfect. But when you've got a morning service and an evening service, and you meet on Wednesday night, like you say, it's not about that one climactic event. So I actually think that we have to have wisdom not to overtax people. I mean, a service can be too long for most people to be able to tolerate it and concentrate and enjoy it. And I don't mean like enjoy it like tickle their fancy. I mean enjoy the Lord and His Word, because it wasn't 3 hours long. Mm-hmm. That it was within the range that a human could tolerate and use, and that's culturally conditioned too. It's going to depend. A new congregation is going to have a different tolerance, different age. A very young or a very old congregation is going to be different. But you have to have common sense. So, Sean, I assume you try to exercise wisdom in these things.
Yeah, that's right, and that's where I think sanctified common sense comes in, a reality of some of the cultural conditions that are not necessarily cultural absolutes, and then the leadership exercising appropriate discretion and making prudential judgment calls about how to go about these things. So, a couple maybe easy examples, or at least they seem easy to me. So, we're just naturally social creatures. I mean, yeah, some people are more introverted, some are more extroverted. I get that. But in general, people are just naturally social creatures. They want to be together. They want to converse. They want to fellowship. They want to spend time with one another. That's particularly true in Christian fellowship and for Christian friendship. Where I'm going with that is, let me use, again, an American example and a Scottish example. And I think each do it well, given their particular cultural conditions and realities and just the customs of their people. In our church, Brad, in the American South, we have the Sunday school hour before the morning worship service. And so people are busy fetching their kids from the Sunday school classes, and, babies in nursery, and some people are coming in, and there's some coffee out in the narthex area, and people are talking and conversing. And again, particularly Southerners, they love to talk with one another. They love to catch up. They love to converse. And this is happening in the half hour between the end of Sunday school and the beginning of morning worship. And that's just a natural thing that people might expect. And so we have, it seems to be, to me, a wise thing of allowing that to happen. People find their way into the worship hall. They get seated. But then there's that time of the announcements of, let's call things to order. This is, were there announcements in the early church and in the New Testament church? I don't know. Probably not the way that we have them, but we have what we have, and that's all right. That's just the reality of our time. So it's a handy way to get people's attention, to help settle them down, call their attention to the events that are happening in the life of the body that they need to be aware of, and just to transition from that arrival, a little bit frenetic energy sort of time period, the catching up period, to let's settle in and prepare ourselves to worship the living God and to meet with Him, because that's what we're about to do. And then we go through the worship service, and after the benediction, there's more fellowship and conversing afterwards, which is wonderful. And then I contrast that to several of the Free Church of Scotland congregations that I've visited a couple of times, where in those churches it was not their custom to have an hour of Sunday school or Christian education prior to the worship service. It would just be people would come from their homes and make their way to the church building around the 11 o'clock hour, and worship would be at 11. And so it was their custom to simply walk or drive from their home to arrive to the worship hall, They would take their seat, and there would generally be no talking or visiting. It would just be people finding their way in quietly and taking their seat. There were no announcements beforehand. Just about 11 o'clock, the minister and a couple of elders would come and find their way to the front, and then he would just get up and say, "Let us worship God," and give the call to worship, and off they would go. And at least in those 3 or 4 free church congregations that I visited, they'd go through the course of the worship service, and then after the benediction, then the minister would give the announcements, and they would use that for their transition time. And at least in those 4 churches that I visited, it was all of their custom was to everyone stay around after the morning worship service, because the folks are in the back getting tea and coffee and cake and cookies ready, and we're just going to have an extended time of fellowship after the worship service. So after the benediction, then they would give the announcements for, the relevant items that are going on in the life of the congregation while the coffee and cookies are getting prepared. And then people would linger for a long time for tea and cake, and have a grand old time. And that worked. So given our context of there's a busy hour of Christian education afterwards, it's good to have that time of transition and get people settled in before the call to worship. In those Scottish churches where there was no hour of Christian education, people just walked quietly through the neighborhood and found their way and found their seats, and they were quietly getting ready for worship. It made sense to not have maybe some busy announcements and then just get right into the call to worship, because that's what they were culturally conditioned and accustomed to doing. So prudential, wise, informed discretion and judgment calls being exercised by the elders in 2 particular locations, I think good all around.
All right, a couple of more things I wanted to mention. One of them sort of, a hot issue now. It's the who leads worship. Now, we're sort of agreed on that issue here, but why is it important who leads it, and not just anyone, and not just a rotating cast of characters? There's some local churches, I'll see their videos online, and from week to week, they have different soloists, different musicians, different band configurations, of course, different stagings and props and all that. So you never know what you're going to get. But if you have a church where you let lay people read scripture and do the call to worship and conduct a lot of the elements, to be honest, of the worship service, there's an issue then of distraction to me. I wonder who we got this week, and what's he or she wearing? Now, if we can't trust the ministers today to dress appropriately and act appropriately, how much more or less can we trust church members to do this? But there's the issue of competence. If you're not used to reading, a lot of times you'll see people holding their phone, okay? Now, I can read scripture in the worship service in my seat much better from a phone, because my eyes are poor. The lighted screen helps a great deal. And I can follow. It's very hard for me I have a real hard time following in a hymn book. I sing the wrong words a lot, which is not good. I think my wife doesn't like that. But I've never stood up before the church holding my phone and reading from my phone. But we see that all the time in churches. So there's an issue of competency. And when it's somebody new, what do we immediately do? We become critics. We're going to rate the performance of this person. It's going to be distracting. So the who leads is actually very important. Of course, we believe that the officers, the elders, should lead worship, primarily the pastor. So the who is very important for I think just the quality. Reverence for the word, but also the competency that goes along with it. I think, John, the last show we talked about, how important the reading of the word is, and that the person who reads it should understand it, understand what to emphasize, what tone to use to be able to speak clearly. But the who's very important, and I think that's got to work against reverence. Sometimes if the wrong people or just anyone happens to be leading the congregation in worship. I can't imagine most people really enjoy it, think that's a good thing. But thoughts on the who?
Well, if I may, I think we got to go to the biblical theology of what the church understood for centuries of what was going on in called worship. and it ties into so many different things of Reformed theology and practice that, again, and Hebrews is full of this. The book of Hebrews is just the manual on meeting with the great high priest, and that we learn that Hebrews interprets Psalm 22 to us, and that there is Christ, and he is gathered with the children that the Father has given to him, and he is going to declare the Father's name to them, and he's going to sing over them. And then Hebrews breaks out into Psalm 8, Psalm 22, Psalm 110. I mean, he's all over the place. And so now we know what's going on. And then we get to chapter 8, and we've got this minister, this liturgos, and that is Christ again. This is heaven and earth meeting together. The saints are being called up to Zion, to heaven. And Christ is leading us and is presiding. And we have not come to Horeb. We have come to Zion. Let us draw near. All these things are going on. And so we've long understood that this minister who's going to stand in the place between and actually minister the word in Zion is a unique person, is a unique man. He stands in this line of the apostles, the prophets, the pastors, the teachers, the evangelists. He stands in that unique, and all the things that regard his ordination and his training and the laying on of hands and all the other systems in the doctrine, they all come down to this, that is what is taking place, the ministry of the word. And this speaks to so much of what goes on in worship too, is it's a tabernacle not made with human hands. There's not really room to bring anything human in. You bring your voice, you bring your vocal cords, you bring the instrument that God gave you when he made you in his image, and you give your sacrifice of praise. And so that was known for centuries of Christianity before entertainment culture or westward expansion and the Methodists and the Baptists and so forth got creative and innovative. That was long known, that the ministers stood in this long line, and the elders in this long line of various men called to do this peculiar work, to tremble as they do it, because they also have to give an account. And that's what's going on. They're ministering. They're liturgists for this process. And we've seen such strange polarities in even in the last few years in the controversies in our circles. The far left with the revoiced conflict, they're going to bring queer treasure into Zion. The far right now, the kings are going to bring their glory in. Well, that's a measure of the gold, which God has already said in his oracle of Psalm 50. The gold is his. Everything that's coming to worship is God supplying, and he is doing it. He is sort of, I don't even want to use the word mediating because I think that's the wrong word. It's being ministered through the officers that are described in the system of doctrine, and that the people be taught what it is to be caught up to Zion, to go up to the house of the Lord, to the general assembly of the holy angels and the saints who have died, and that Christ is leading. And so when the word is faithfully preached, Christ is preaching. When the songs on our lips are the songs of Zion, Christ is leading us and singing with us. And so this whole atmosphere has got to be taught and recovered, and the Reformed should have no excuse.
Yeah, I think our worship, even the controversies, it always comes down to worship. A lot of the issues we see in the PCA today are about freedom to worship the way you want to, and to order other things the way you want to, that the way that you think works best in your context. I may publish it. I have a thought experiment on that, on contextualization. But let's just say that the context that we minister in is the church. Mm-hmm. That's where the worship happens. So our context is a Reformed church, so we ought to act like one. And we can figure out, well, I think we can't, some people say, well, what even is that? Well, I think we know what it is. We can look at our international brothers and tell what it is, because there are many Reformed people around the world who worship very, happily, very much like we do. That's one of the great benefits of traveling. Your brother Ben Glasser has found that. We found that in Peru and other parts of the world. And oh, by the way, one of our Chinese missionaries, he says in rural areas where they're under persecution in China, they start about 7 o'clock in the morning and they go a good 12 or 14 hours. They worship. They have 3 or 4 sermons, which all should be an hour or more, according to them. And they eat together and they take naps together and they spend the whole day, because the way he described it was every week could be the last for them, but it could be the same for us. Every week could be the last for us too. So yeah, it's getting outside of our little preferred bubbles doesn't work against this. It promotes it, actually. So. Well, so I think that's about all I've got. I'm sure no one's ever talked about this subject for an hour and 15 minutes before, with occasional, Simpsons references. And I don't know if anyone noticed the intro song, which is also the outro song. The brother says that the fire of God fell, and it was so amazing that his mother almost dropped him. I don't know if you all heard that, but that's what he's saying. That his mother nearly dropped him. So, mothers, don't drop your babies, I guess is the best. It's the takeaway. So that's another view.
You would only hear that here.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the takeaway. That's the practical advice for all the women listening in particular. But the fathers, help your wife with the children in worship too. That's
don't drop them.
Yes. Especially if you've got a balcony like we do. We haven't had a kid go over the rail yet, but
no Michael Jordan moments or Michael Jackson moments showing off.
Right. Yes. No. Unless Sean's done that to one of his for discipline purposes when I wasn't there.
Not yet, but surely the day is coming.
Well, all right. Well, anything either one of you need to share with us? Get off your chest or any of those things before we wrap up?
I would just say that, the next 40 days are a great excuse to eat sausages. So keep that in mind as a public service announcement.
We will do that. Yes.
Why is something happening?
That's right. Yeah, my birthday, Resby, March 9th, which was Zwingley's Affair of the Sausages, happens to be my birthday, which is wonderful.
Mine is tomorrow.
Oh. Well, we might have to do something about
that. No, I don't. Well, Thursday night we're gonna see. We'll get together. If you haven't forgotten already.
If you haven't forgotten, yeah.
Yep.
A couple years ago, a friend of mine, it was when we were getting ready to move from Virginia to Oak Ridge, and he was on a Reformation history kick, and he pointed out the Zwingley's Affair of the Sausages, and he showed me the date, and I hadn't realized it until that time of, hey, March 9th. That's a great day. The Affair of the Sausages. So that's my claim to fame henceforth.
Yep.
We're gonna kick it off tomorrow night in our Wednesday night, just because there are some churches even in our area that will be applying the ashes.
Oh, so is tomorrow Ash Wednesday?
I believe so.
Yeah, that shows how much I follow it. Well, get ready for lots of social media posts tomorrow, and people on Fox News with their smudge. So
I knew it was coming around because somebody made mention of Mardi Gras and king cakes, but I'm out of it, so I didn't know when exactly it was. But all right, so it's that time again. Okay.
So Resby, food correspondent, talk us out, and thank everyone for listening.
Well, since those of you, were interested, I had a nice Peruvian chicken takeout for dinner tonight. Wife had to drive a bit, so she picks them up on the way home. Always nice. We eat well in our extremely small town. Stay tuned next time. We'll see if I can remember the other Simpsons reference from in my brain. But thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Sean, for coming on, and always great to talk and hear what's going on in the world. But tomorrow you could do a lot of things. Please don't be an Erdman.
When the power of God came down, when the power of God came down, that night my mother almost dropped me when the power of the Lord it came down.
What's wrong with you people?